Morning Blues for Monday, the 7th of April 2025. Hope you had a great weekend. I'm Daniel Childs. This is going to be a show about a couple of things. One, hopefully optimistic transfer story about a big position that Chelsea could be going in for this summer, an opportunity. An argument between Christopher Nkunku and Robert Sanchez, and who do you actually prefer out of those two? That's an interesting question. And this whole Premier League basically being ruined or very boring this season that has sprung up after, I guess, the two games yesterday, but mainly after the Manchester derby and what Gary Neville and others had to say. So I've got a bit to say about that and why I think people are feeling like that at the moment. So please do like, subscribe, give me your thoughts down in the comments below. If you haven't listened or watched my review of the Brentford game, it is up on my YouTube, but also the podcast feed. And just on the Premier League issue, it's going to be my big Substack piece today. So go and check out my Substack, £4 a month to get exclusive member posts and also able to get early access to the podcast that I release, especially with guests. And I've got a good guest coming up, hopefully some more before the end of this season. So obviously Chelsea drew yesterday, did keep a clean sheet, and Robert Sanchez did get more positive reviews than negative. But still, the goalkeeping issue is a big one for the summer. And Matt Law reported just before the Spurs game that there is going to be an internal review inside Chelsea about the goalkeeping department. He explained this a bit more in depth on the London is Blue pod when they were over in London. And he sort of gave bit of detail about this, that he suspects that Philip Jorgensen is unlikely to be sold. He suspects that maybe Mike Penders, is kind of hard to know whether he'll be fully back or will be loaned out once again. I don't know why you have to have an internal review between those two players. I don't know why you even need to have an internal review to begin with. It should be pretty obvious who should be getting sold. And even though he's kept 2 clean sheets, it should still be Robert Sanchez. That is undeniable. But there has been chatter about, well, will Chelsea even go out and sign a new goalkeeper, which many people believe they shouldn't. Matt Law is not that kind of optimistic that that's going to happen. It's not one of the big positions that apparently Chelsea are targeting compared to, say, centre forward and even out wide in the winger department. But he did say, which is usually the case for Chelsea, if an opportunity presents itself. Could this be an opportunity via TMW's Nicolo Ciccarini? I know that Simon Phillips brought this up on X, that Chelsea and Aston Villa have already asked for information on Mike Maignan. If Milan are to avoid losing Maignan for free, they must sell him in the summer. So it looks like one of those situations where Maignan and like a lot of players are not willing to sign that new deal. If they don't sign that new deal, you're going to be losing them on a free, which is kind of unacceptable for a player of Maignan's, I think, importance to Milan and his potential and just quality. This is one of those names that if they become available and if you're able to get them, you should be snapping them up. I think Mike Maignan has been one of the best keepers in Europe for quite a while. And I think that, it's a position that, to me, it would be a name of significance. It would be a statement name that position is needed for a long period of time. And if there is any chance of doing it, I think you have to walk in and get it done. If people start moaning about wages, I say again, do you want to have a serious option in that position that over a period of time, if you pay serious wages, you're probably going to get a good goalkeeper and it's probably going to pay you back in dividends, to be honest, because you're going to get a settled position, a settled player in that area that you don't have to shuffle with every 12 to 18 months because it's no longer good enough, and hopefully can really raise the level of your defence. That should be the aim of that position. That should be the aim of every position in the squad. But particularly, I guess the two big ones that I think are quite defining for any football team is your goalkeeper and your centre forward. Those are the two positions that I still think, no matter how much we talk about advanced metrics and tactics, those are the two positions that I think define your success, especially in the sense of a goalkeeper. If that isn't a sorted area, it's going to cost you more times than not. And obviously Chelsea have seen that. Mike Maignan, Diogo Costa is a player I've liked, not just for his name, but I do think he's been a really good goalkeeper that has been linked to Chelsea under this ownership before. But in terms of the potential there, and it probably would still be a sizable fee even with a year left, because good goalkeepers are very hard to snap up. It's not like any other position. So you are probably still going to have to pay a premium. But what I would say is, I don't think that's a problem. I think the issue Chelsea have got themselves into of in key positions of if you sometimes signing cheap, you end up getting what you pay for. Not all the time. Sometimes you can find hidden gems in the market, but especially when you're a club like Chelsea, it's more often than not you have to pay a premium, and I don't think that's a negative. And Mike Maignan, I think that's a name. Maybe it's just a name being put out there and there's no substance to it whatsoever, and in a couple of days we'll hear, no, they're absolutely happy, Chelsea, with all their options, which is usually the case. I wouldn't take that as gospel, but it would be a move that I'd be fully backing because I think Maignan has been a dominant keeper in Europe. If you speak to people who watch Italian football, and my good friend Jay McIntosh, who's actually more of a fan of Inter Milan than AC Milan, but he's a big admirer of Mike Maignan, so I'd be excited to see this happen. Speaking of goalkeepers at Chelsea, footage has come out of Robert Sanchez and Christopher Nkunku having an argument that was caught on camera from the away end at Brentford yesterday. This was after Sanchez made a routine save and then Nkunku was seen having a go at him right away and waving his arms everywhere, to which Sanchez reacted. Now, whilst the game was going on, and as I spoke about in my review, there was one particular moment when Sanchez played the ball out, and if you're watching on camera, like if you're watching the broadcast basically, it looks like the classic Robert Sanchez stupid ball into the centre of the park that gets intercepted by the opposition, and then suddenly Chelsea are under pressure. And many people were pointing the finger at Christopher Nkunku there. Actually, he didn't drop back deep enough to receive the ball. He was going in behind rather than dropping deep, and that's why the ball was dispossessed and a bit of miscommunication between those two players. Christopher Nkunku is under a lot of scrutiny at the moment, and I think rightly so. Even if I was someone at the start of this season, last season, who was really excited to see what he could do in a Chelsea shirt, he has completely failed this season for Chelsea in terms of his application, his performance level. I don't give the excuse of, well, he's been completely miscast. I still think even if you're being played in maybe your not most favourable position, there still should be a level of application that you bring to the game that then we can look at and go, well, listen, he's still giving a lot, but it's quite clearly the coach isn't putting him in the best role. Personal responsibility should still come into play. And for a guy with his technical ability and for a guy with his potential, which we have seen at Chelsea in brief glimpses, I don't think his level of performance has been very good. And I think between this, I'd be interested to see whether you side with Sanchez or Christopher Nkunku here. And, maybe it shows the sign of some disharmony between, players. And also Nkunku just, to me, just watching him, it doesn't seem like he's very connected to what's going on at Chelsea. It looks like all of this is quite an inconvenience for him because maybe he made his mind up. Maybe the rumours about him being close to a move away from Chelsea in January were pretty accurate and they couldn't find a deal with, say, Bayern Munich, were the team most linked. And he's just ready. He's biding his time. Maybe internally the club have told him there's no plans for you here, so you might as well prepare for a move away in the summer. And then mentally he's just like, well, I don't see the point of giving my all here or really being invested in Chelsea because Chelsea are not invested in me. So it maybe is one of those cases. I can't believe that Nkunku is going to remain a Chelsea player beyond this season because nothing at the moment is showing a player who's fighting for his future, who's trying to prove people wrong, and that's really disappointing. And maybe yesterday, this clip in itself was a sign of that. The rest of the show, I want to talk about this debate that came up around the Premier League, Pep Guardiola style of football, and just some of the quotes that came out after the game between Man United and Man City at Old Trafford that was so dull, was so bland. I mean, just again another game that was hyped that has really disappointed. And people generally, I've seen this a lot this season, that people have just been underwhelmed by the Premier League. The quality of the Premier League, I think, undeniably hasn't been that good. It's very hard to gauge how great Liverpool are, because of course they lost yesterday, but you look at the rest of the league, there's been no serious title challenge past January. Arsenal quickly fell away. No team has been really consistent. There's been a lot of inconsistency across the league. The only thing left to kind of fight for this season is between Champions League qualification and Europa League qualification, and who's going to finish 4th, 5th, who's going to finish below that. And you look at the two games yesterday, Chelsea and Man City both playing, both very important games. Both games ended 0-0, and neither of them really looked like two teams who understood the stakes of the occasion and really put out a great performance. And it reflects maybe a stylistic, tactical problem a game that's being ruined kind of by analytics data, overcoaching. Gary Neville, I think, really hit the nail on the head, and we'll get to some other points of view on this that I really do think, as I say, sum up the issue, and I'll give you my thoughts.
I apologise for my cold commentary, actually. I think I let it get to me. I was boring on there as well. That was drab as well. It honestly, just the whole game. There's part of me, I get what he's saying about it being that point in the season, about City United are in a difficult moment. But this robotic nature of not leaving our positions, of basically being micromanaged within an inch of our lives, of not having any freedom to take a risk to go and try and win a football match, is becoming an illness in the game. It's becoming a disease in the game. And I think ultimately, think about Pep Guardiola and his teams over the last 10 years, that's what his teams do. But we're seeing poor imitations of that across the board now.
I think that it is quite revealing that even Gary Neville, who is arguably Sky Sports' most prominent pundit commentator, is saying live on air what probably Sky Sports don't want to be said live on air, is that the product is pretty crap. It's pretty bland and it's pretty boring. Scott Saunders, who's Man United fan but also previously of 90 Min, has got his own podcast, The Promised Land, said Sky might have to start thinking about dropping the Super off Super Sunday if the standard of football continues like this for much longer. Seems like we're getting stinkers with regularity at the moment. Too much football, knackered players who can't live with expected intensity, exhausting, endless debate. And then Harry Brooks, who's a professional football coach who coached some good players, said people are finally fighting back over how boring and lacking in personality modern football is. Anyone that knows me knows it's been my biggest issue with the game for years. It's something that maybe we've alluded to, mainly talking about Enzo Maresca, but Enzo Maresca I think is a symptom of the problem rather than the sole problem himself, really, is that the game has become very bland, very predictable, I think kind of over-intellectualized. I've talked about this a number of times. Like, football at its core is not an intellectual exercise. It's not an intellectual sport. I'm not saying that there's nothing about it that you can look into with depth and analyze and really break down and think about the theory and the philosophy behind it. I'm not saying that is an irrelevant pursuit. Because some of my favorite podcasts, some of my favorite football books that I've read throughout the years are about that. But at its core, I think people want to see a game that engages them, that feels intense, feels entertaining. And the problem is at the moment is you have a game that seems so distant from the people watching it, and people within the media, I guess is kind of the easiest way to describe it, are sometimes trying to sell the idea that the game has never been better when the product on the pitch does not reflect that at all. Southampton being relegated yesterday and their fans were clapping them off. This is one of the worst Premier League teams we've ever seen. And in the first half of the season, they were playing some of the dumbest football I have ever watched in my entire life. Genuinely, staggeringly bad levels of intelligence, like low levels of intelligence for a football team. And it was coached by someone who clearly wanted to play a brand of football that undeniably it links back to one coach, a coach who's done a lot of great things in the game, but maybe his overall impact on English football and more generally European football in terms of the style that many clubs have gone for is not great. And that, of course, is Pep Guardiola. It's very easy to lay out the line, Pep Guardiola has ruined football. I think that's a bit too simplistic because there's a lot of variables within that, right? Like, clubs do not have to follow the Pep Guardiola style of football. It's not like every single club in the Premier League plays that style of football. That is a reductive way to analyse the game at the moment. There are actually some antidotes to that I think are proving that there is a new way forward, and hopefully more clubs cling on to that. But obviously, if we're talking about Chelsea haven't done that. Chelsea have gone for kind of the most bland, easiest, lazy, I think, idea of what football needs to be at the moment. It's going with basically Diet Pep, right? It is reheated, kind of put it in the microwave, positional style of football that isn't engaging, that has been done to death at this point, that it seems like many teams have figured out how to break down, and we're pursuing it apparently for the long term. I don't think that's a great idea. I think there are many flaws to it. But I also think there is an economic side to this as well, is that people are being asked, especially in the Premier League, fans of especially big clubs, but I think generally, are being asked to pay more money to go and watch this. And then are watching a game where that flair, that invention, that creativity, that maverick spark, that individualism that certain talents that get you off your feet. You know, you think about your favourite moments watching Chelsea, just as a Chelsea fan. You think about Eden Hazard taking the ball from the halfway line and on his own, dancing past several Arsenal players, shrugging off Coquelin, getting himself inside the 6-yard box and putting the ball past Petr Cech and then knee sliding in front of the Harding lower. You think about the things that Cole Palmer has done, even in his Chelsea career so far. The moments of invention and spark and creativity that unfortunately we haven't seen that much of. You think about great moments in Premier League history, the likes of, you know, Thierry Henry's solo runs or Dennis Bergkamp's goal or the volleys from either Van Persie or Rooney. You look through great Premier League moments and so much of them have very little, if anything, to do with tactics. I'm always struck, you know, I think it was JT speaking to Janobi Mikel on his podcast about Eden Hazard. And he specifically said in that 14-15 season, it became clear that Eden Hazard is going to do what Eden Hazard is going to do. And you are an idiot if you try and restrain what he does. He is just, you know, he's going to turn up on a Saturday. He's going to be the best footballer and you just give him the ball and he'll sort you out. If we get the structure around him right, if we get our defence right, if we get our midfield right, if we have a good stable base, if we have a centre forward like Diego Costa who can help service Eden Hazard and score goals himself. But really, you don't need to do that much. You don't need to talk about field tilts and you don't need to talk about half spaces. Pass the ball to Eden Hazard. He is that good a talent that he will sort out the game. And I think that's what people feel like is being missed. And I think the concern for me and many others is, especially at an academy level, we're going to end up losing some brilliant talents because it's going to kind of be beaten out of them to be a bit of a maverick, to think outside the box, to take a chance at times, to actually give a platform to players, to try things. I think you watch some players at Chelsea currently, and a lot of the players, the generation of players that we've got coming through now, because it is a very young squad, have been coached like that. So when you see Jadon Sancho cut back onto his right foot a number of times and not look instinctively to either play a quick pass round the back of a defence or take a shot, is that just the way he's been coached? Is that the way a lot of players are being coached now? And they're being told, this is the way you do it. You don't go out of the mould. And if you do, if you're Enzo Maresca, you say publicly, if you don't do what I tell you to do, if you try and break that mould, if you try and get out of my rigid system, you will be subbed off. I mean, I think that is, again, it's not trying to say that Enzo Maresca is the be-all and end-all here, because obviously not. This is a wider issue that many people not nowhere close to Chelsea, don't like Chelsea, are feeling and thinking at the moment. I don't think that is a unique issue, but I do think it is a clear problem. And I'd like to hear your thoughts. Because I don't want to get to a stage where we say tactics don't matter and data doesn't matter and all of this stuff is completely worthless and we kind of regress to a point where, you know, we're just hoofing the ball forward aimlessly. There needs to be a nuance within that. I would just like some more variation. I just don't like the idea that football needs to be played in this very slow, repetitive, bland, passing the ball side to side. I do agree passionately with Scott Saunders, and many people have brought this up before. The calendar is ridiculous. Since COVID broke a lot of brains, but it seemed to break the brain of the people scheduling football, because we have decided to take what happened in COVID as kind of a blueprint for how things move forward now. COVID was a very unique situation in the world, but especially in football, in that to get fixtures over the line, we did it in a congested period. That should have been the only time it happens. A unique, extreme circumstance. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Football doesn't seem to end anymore. And although maybe at a time when I was 7 or 8 years old, that would have seemed great, nowadays, I don't think that's great. I don't think it's great for the players, and I don't think it's great for the product. Look at the number of players, especially young players, who have broken down in recent years. I look at someone like Mason Mount, and I think that guy played an insane number of football games during that COVID period, and you're telling me none of that impacted him as a footballer late on? Reece James, he played a lot of football during that period, and many others who have seemed to have really struggled to keep fit. And players are exhausted. When Chelsea's season ends, there is no kind of serious break between that and the Club World Cup. And then once you finish the Club World Cup, it then goes back into pre-season, where they're probably going to jet off to the US, back to the Premier League, and then maybe in the Champions League or some form of European football. That all continues for another year. And then what is it next year? Of course, we've got 2026, we've got the World Cup. So it goes straight into the World Cup and then back to domestic football. It's insanity. And I think that it's a combination of the style and the tactical approach of coaches and clubs being very dull and not helping creativity, and also the managing and the scheduling from the authorities that clubs are responsible for too, because they go for it because they see dollar signs, basically make more money. That is a problem, and that's why I think you're reaching maybe a breaking point, or just a stage where many people are just looking at this and going, this isn't elite football, this isn't entertaining, this is insulting, and it's really taking the game further away from supporters. So that's my bit on it, and I'll probably write a piece on my Substack about it too. So that is it for Morning Blues today. Please let me know your thoughts on everything I say in the comments below. Have a great rest of your Monday. We'll be back again to react to the latest Chelsea news and all that good stuff, building up to Thursday's game in the Europa Conference League in Warsaw, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.